This is Dr. T. Lakshmi discussing you about the estimation of fixed and working capital requirements for the organization. Once the business has started, mainly the fund acquiring for the smooth functioning of the business activities is called as the capital. At the time of the spending, so the acquiring stages, there are various things are all there, but at the time of acquired capital allocation to the business activities, so for example 100 crores of the funds is acquired by the organization, and that 100 crores of the funds has to allocate for the business activities. While allocating that funds, if the organization is going to be spending for the long term activities like fixed elements, for example, plant and machinery, buildings, furnitures, computers. For that one, if they are all spending, then that capital will be called as the fixed capital. And not all entire amount they need not to spend for this fixed capital. Some amount they have to spend for the day-to-day activities are also. So that amount which is kept keeping for the operational elements is called as the working capital. Once if we see this fixed capital, it consists of the assets that are not consumed or destroyed in the production of the goods or services and can be used multiple times. That, for example, like amount spending on the property, plant, and equipments, then that standard capital spending on the business activities is called as the fixed capital. So these are usually illiquid items. First of all, the liquidity items means the items which can easily convertible into cash is called as the liquidity items. But the liquidation process of these fixed assets is somehow time consumption. It is not that much of easy to convert into the cash. Let us say if we have the gold with us, then for our emergency purposes we can easily spend that funds. But if it is a land or the building, it is not that much of easy to convert into cash easily. That capital will be, that is called as illiquid, and that illiquidity nature is the main characteristics of this fixed capital. So that's why the fixed capital is the investments in the fixed assets of the organization that is durable in nature. Let us say the fixed capital money investments is called as plant and machinery, building and land, computer and devices, patent rights, copyrights and designing rights, and goodwill of the organization for the brand image, advertisements, etc. If they are all spending, that funds will be called as the fixed capital. So to acquire this fixed capital, there are many sources are all there for the organization, that is in the form of issuing of the shares or the redirected profits in the form of the retained earnings, term loans, that is from the banks or from the leasing financial corporation, that is non-banking financial corporations, and the debentures in the form of the debentures, bonds are also they can acquire that fixed capital. If we see the role and importance of this fixed capital is required to buy the fixed assets of the company, because fixed assets are all the main setup function of the every business activity. And this is are also needed to meet various promotional expenses of the organization, so like advertisements, and to give the good ambience to the customers, they have to spend certain amount on the organizations. That is the one. And it aids company to modernize by easing the purchase of modern machines, implementation of the latest technologies. So that is for the renovation, modernization, the amount spending is also used as a fixed capital. And it is necessary to replace outdated or scrap the assets. If an asset is spoiled or outdated, then to replace that one, the capital required is called as the fixed capital. And this capital is using for the expansion and diversification of the business activities, like expansion of another unit, or diversifying their business from one location to another location. They requires this kind of the capital. And it also helps in automation of the company. that is technology updations, automational activities implementation, and to get the advanced infrastructure facilities. And not only to that one, what's not essentially, if the company wants to decide to expand their scope of the activities, and if they wants to increase the capital requirements of the company, at all the situations they need to revise the fixed capital and its characteristics. So the estimation of the fixed capital is based on the certain factors like nature of the business. If that nature of the business is single or the solo proprietorship, fixed capital may be very less requirement. If that business is having more demand and it is that to a limited liability position, then definitely they can expand their businesses. Based on that one, the fixed capital will also be very more to that organizations when compared to this solo proprietary or the unlimited companies. The limited companies will get the maximum fixed capital for their business activities, and that too, this fixed capital is estimating based on the scale of operations. If their level of the operations are all more, then the capital which is spending for that business activities will also be more. But if the level of their operations are less, the fixed capital will also be less. And techniques of the production. If more techniques are using means more production is doing and that much of demand they have there in the market, then at that situations obviously the fixed capital will be more, and that too the machineries installation land go down space, for that one they need to spend more fixed capital. If the techniques of the production is very less, it's not that much of land is required, machineries are not required, then automatically the fixed cap spending on that particular activities will be very less. Same as if the organizations are all using the traditional methods of the technology, then that much of technology updation is not required for that businesses, then the fixed capital will be very less. If that business is requires always the automation of the technology is required for this business activities, then the fixed capital requirements is very more. And the growth perspective, if that business has the scope to grow and also it wants to expand its business activities, obviously the spending on the fixed capital will be increases. But if they are already grown and they are all going to be stabilizing their activities, they won't spend that much of money for the fixed capital, but they can divert those funds for the long term activities of the business organization. Apart from that one, based on the availability of this finance and the level of their collaborations and the joint ventures, this fixed capital will be decides. If there is more availability is there, they can get maximum capital. If the less availability is there and the less credibility is there for the owner, then there is a chance of getting a less amount for the fixed capital. So that is the elements which has to keep in the mind by the owner of the organization before going to be estimating this fixed capital. Then apart from this fixed capital, the amount which is using for the day-to-day activities is called as the working capital. So that is all the items in the short-term connection of the business like the cash, short-term debts, investments, inventory, debtors, payables, etc. So for all this one, the net amount which is going to be spending for this business activities is called as this working capital. Here, the working capital is divided into two elements: the amount which is spending and the amount which is going to be benefiting to the organization, like current assets and current liabilities. The difference between the current assets and the current liabilities generally will be called as the working capital of the organization. So cash management, liquidity management, these are also some of the interrelated concepts to the working capital management. So that's why some of the branches of this working capital means it includes the liquidity management, that is which assets has to sell. If it life has done, then they have to sell and they need to contribute some cash to the organization, or which assets they have to purchase, which can easily convertible into cash. So that is going to be taking care of this liquidity management and account receivables management. So the account receivables, so some creditors are all there, or the debtors are all there. When has to receive that accounts and when has to pay that one, that is going to be taking care of account receivables management and accounts payables management. And if they have any short term debts and have to pay, that one is going to be taking care of short term debt management and purchasing of the raw material, allocation of that raw material and the finished goods, storaging, everything is going to be taken care by the inventory management. So like this, there are certain subdivisions are all there under the working capital management. So to manage that working capital, the for the easy consideration of that one, or the spending at the time of the spending, for the easy recognition, this working capital is divided into two elements, that is on the basis of the concept, it is gross working capital and net working capital. The total amount which has to spend by the business activities is called as the gross working capital. In that one, they won't take the any taxations or any wastages in the scraps. After this addings and subtractions of this depreciation or any other elements, the net amount required for the organization is called as the net working capital. For example, already for this particular year, the organization has estimated 10 crores of funds they have to spend for the business activities or business operations. That is called as the gross working capital. Already they have 2 crores of the reserves with them for this working capital, which is carrying from the previous year, which means net amount required for this business activities is only 8 crores. That is called as the net working capital. That is on the basis of the concept, it is gross working capital or net working capital. But on the basis of the time period, it is categorized as permanent working capital or the temporary working capital. This is again the working capital which is spending for the permanent, that is regularly, or every year, that expenditure is the same, then that will be called as a permanent working capital. And based on the one season or the special occasions, if they have to spend on that financial year, they will spend that amount. Next financial year, this temporary working capital may exist or may not exist, or that purpose might be changed. That is called as the temporary working capital. Again, the permanent working capital will be regular working capital and reserve working capital. So for the day-to-day activities spending, they have to spend, that amount will be called as the regular working capital, and the amount which is keeping aside for the unexpected losses is called as the reserve working capital. And temporary working capital, the amount which is spending on seasonal basis, that is if the rains comes, the storage, to maintain that storage, some protectional activities they have to take. For that amount, if they have to spend, that will be called as seasonal working capital. At the time of summer season, if at all any situations they have to take, or in this COVID situations, this is a season of the COVID. For this one, temporarily they need to maintain certain hygienic conditions, environmental conditions. The amount spending on that activities will be called as seasonal working capital. And for the unexpected losses, if they have to spend, that capital is called as this special working capital. Why this working capital is having this much of importance means its ability to face the crisis of the business is the one of the main reasons for maintaining of the working capital, because it is going to be maintaining the beneficiary elements to avoid the crisis situations of the business, and it is going to be using for the smooth business activities, and it is going to be using for the regular supply of the raw material, and that too, obtaining of such loans is also very easy for the organizations, and this is going to be enhancing the goodwill of the organization and also gives the solvency position of the organization. Anyhow, the day-to-day activities is the real activity performing in the organization. So that's why the working capital is very important for every business organization. So here is also to determine the working capital, they need to consider certain elements into the considerations, that is the nature of the business. If that nature of the business is manufacturing industry, generally more fixed capital they prefer than the working capital. If it is a service agency, then definitely it requires the more working capital than the fixed capital. That is, the nature of the business will decide the amount of the working capital or the proportion of the working capital over the fixed capital. And based on the market and demand activities are also, there is a changes are required for this working capital, as well as based on their manufacturing policies, credit policies, suppliers credit, efficiency of the operations, inflation rates, the rates of the raw materials which are existing out there, out of the market, or considerable points to decide the working capital requirement of the any organization. So to estimate the requirement of this working capital, three methods are all going to be using by the organizations, that is percentage of sales method. So it's the oldest method, and that is going to be on relationship of the sales and working capital it is going to be using. Generally it is the simplest method, but assumption is somehow difficult for this type of method. Let us say their sales, expecting sales are all 10 crores. There, based on this 10 crores, they will estimate the working capital. Out of this 10 crores, how much will be the working capital if they estimates, then that is called as percentage of sales method. Let us say 60% of these sales we need to spend for the working capital, means they have to spend for the 6 crores of the funds for this working capital. That is the estimation of the working capital as a percentage of sales method. And regression analysis method. So it is a statistical estimation tool which is used to establish the relationship between the inceptions as well as flopex reserves. That is, what is the requirement and what is the real expenditures. If they take the statistical and coefficient of correlations when compared to the previous year, this year, that analysis will be called as regression analysis estimation for the working capital. And operating cycle method, this is the best method which is suitable for the most of the business activities, that is based on their business activities. So what is the expenditure required, and that estimation basis, if they spend that if they maintains that funds of the working capital, then it is easy for them to maintain the best working capital management activities. So if we see these differences between this fixed capital and the working capital, so generally fixed capital is using for the fixed assets purchasing, whereas the working capital is using for the current assets. And that too, the nature of this fixed capital is permanent in nature, but the working capital is temporary. That too, 1 year basis it is going to be estimating. And the purpose of this fixed capital is to purchase the land, buildings, furnitures, equipments, etc. Whereas the working capital's requirement is to purchase the raw materials, payment of the utilities, bills, repairs and maintenances, etc. And to acquire this fixed capital, they have to approach this equity shares, preference shares, debentures, and the retained earnings, etc. But for the working capital, they can go for this bank loans, public deposits, trade credits, bills, receivables, etc. can be used for the acquiring of this working capital. Anyhow, the objectivity of the investors is going to be investing into the fixed capital, means for the future profit orientation. But the objectivity of this working capital is getting the immediate returns. And that too, risk taking is more in the fixed capital, whereas risk taking will be very less in the working capital activities. That is the differences between the fixed capital and working capital, acquirements, sources, methods in the business economics and financial analysis. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.